evening and welcome to the Gay Liberation Network here on CAN TV. I'm your host, Andy Thayer with the Gay Liberation Network, and with us tonight is Pepe-Julian Onziema. I hope I pronounced that properly, Pepe-Julian.
Yes.
Pepe-Julian is from an organization known as Sexual Minorities Uganda, or SMUG for short. And Pepe-Julian and his organization have been really at the forefront of a lot of very important events, not just for Africa, but for world LGBT politics. For our audience that doesn't understand what's been going on in Africa for the last several years, could you tell us how your organization came to prominence in sort of the work that you do, Pepe-Julian?
Thank you very much for having me on the show. My organization was formed in 2004, and it currently has 18 members. Mm-hmm. But when it was formed, we had 10 members, and our focus was on HIV and AIDS. Mm-hmm.
I should add, for those of our viewers, that's not 10 members in terms of 10 people, but 10 organizations.
Organizations, thank you. And it was in a period when HIV and AIDS was really central to Uganda's prominence. I mean, we were at 6% HIV prevalence, and yet LGBT people were not like part of the groups that were being catered for. So, mm-hmm. And it was, for lack of a better word, it was the easiest way to, it was like an entry point that we could use for mm-hmm. us to seek justice, for us to seek acceptance and some form of attention. So our point at that time was advocacy for mm-hmm. acceptance. Mm-hmm. And it was because most of us who got together mm-hmm. were suffering from, family neglect, from mm-hmm. Being expelled from school, some from jobs, or even social places. So I think fast forward from 2004, in 2007 we had sort of a national coming out event that we called the media campaign. Mm-hmm. We launched it nationwide, though in the city, and we were there were some of us who went with our faces out, and then some of us who had masks. But mm-hmm. the masks were to basically tell the public that you can't know who is LGBT. Mm-hmm. So, and then the faces that were there were like, even if you don't know, we are here to tell you that this mm-hmm. is who we are. Mm-hmm. Of course, it was not received well. They were saying that we were hiding because we were doing shameless things. Mm-hmm. But, and then fast forward from 2007, we had 2008, that, mm-hmm. Rather 2009, mm-hmm. when we saw the anti-homosexuality bill being tabled in our parliament. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, we had kind of already set ourselves to regional and international stage mm-hmm. by that first coming out in 2007. Mm-hmm. So what happened is, when this bill was tabled, we were seeking for mm-hmm. support from across the globe.
Yes.
And we were not ashamed, we were not fearful in seeking for that support, and that is what put us really out on the map and attention to my country, Uganda.
Yeah, but then in 2009, for those who aren't aware, the so-called Kill the Gays bill, which was inspired by a man by the name of Scott Lively here in Massachusetts, in the United States, he's basically spent many years in contact with anti-gay forces around the world, including since, I believe, 2003 in Uganda. He pushed this, what became dubbed the Kill the Gays bill, which would basically say that gay people should be killed for if they're found to be gay. That was later modified to be known as the Jail the Gays bill. And this in a country where ever since British colonial times, under the colonial government, homosexuality had already been illegal, and yet they wanted to pile on and add more opprobrium, if you will, for LGBT people. Why do you think that the other side has decided to escalate against LGBT people? I mean, we have a country that, ever since it was formed in 1962, homosexuality was illegal. It was illegal under the colonialists. Why is it, do you think, that President Museveni and others have pushed these bills to make it even more difficult to be LGBT in Kenya and Uganda?
I think, first of all, before the colonialists came to, to Uganda, queerness, being gay, being transgender was not illegal. So for the British colonialists to win over people from the kingdom, they had to devise, they had to target something that seemed to be in the center of the royalty. And part of it was, celebrating diversity, including sexual and gender diversity. So right now, why it has become such an issue.
Sorry, it sounds like we've got a caller on the air. You can go ahead and put them on. Oh, sorry, we had a caller. Go ahead, Pepe-Julian.
Yeah, so the reason, in my opinion, and from what I've seen happening, is that during Idi Amin's time, there was a lot of economic depression. There was a lot of violence, and the country was just in a mess. And that was the time that evangelicals came into the country to provide shelter, education for orphans, people who had lost, a lot during Idi Amin's time. So the country was, in this space and time where like a savior was needed.
And I should just interject here. It's important to note that Idi Amin came to power in a British-backed coup, and the United States on the side supporting, in 1971, and killed anywhere between 100 to 300,000 of his own people, as well as launched a witch hunt against Indians in the country, and was really supported in this brutality covertly right up until shortly before his overthrow. And so United States hands are not clean in all this, and I think that's very important for LGBTs in this country to understand. It's not U.S. good, Uganda bad, but as in so many of these instances, including in interactions with countries like Russia or Saudi Arabia, the United States has played a nefarious role, unfortunately, in supporting many of the policies it claims to oppose. Before we move on with our conversation, we had a little technical difficulty at the start of the show. I think that we've solved it. I'd like to get up on our screen some information about a couple of appearances that Pepe-Julian is going to have, and encourage our audience to join in on these here. And the first one here coming up on your screen is going to be on Saturday. There we go. A welcome reception tomorrow at the Sidetrack Bar. It's in the going to be on the rooftop. Should be a wonderful day for it. And there's going to be it's going to be at 1 to 3 p.m. tomorrow. As I said, at the Sidetrack rooftop deck, 3349 North Halsted Street, and then on Sunday, he's going to be appearing just right up to the street, leading a panel discussing remembering David Kato, facing the future. David Kato, for those who don't know, was a murdered Ugandan LGBT leader. And that's going to be 2 to 5 p.m. Sunday at the Center on Halsted, 3656 North Halsted Street. And you can get information about both those events. They are asking for a donation at legacyprojectchicago.org. You can get tickets for the event at that website. And before we move on, there is another event that's going to be coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and that's a march against the rape culture. Sorry, the graphic's not appearing on your screen there very well. 1 p.m. Sunday, July 19th, and that's going to be starting at Michigan Avenue and Congress Parkway. But back to our conversation here with Pepe-Julian Onziema. Pepe, what would you see as the United States' role in making the conditions better or worse in Uganda, in your opinion?
I think the United States is a development partner with Uganda, and Uganda has its own values and laws, and also the United States has its values and things that it adheres to. However, when you get into a partnership, of course under what conditions that you get into a partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And I've oftentimes had my own countrymen saying that being LGBT is foreign, or that the U.S. is trying to impose, LGBT rights on Uganda, and that Uganda is sovereign.
Mm-hmm.
But sovereignty must and should include protection, like the Constitution says, the protection of everyone who is within the boundaries of a country, mm-hmm. and Uganda is that. So mm-hmm. when Uganda fails to do that, mm-hmm. and it's in partnership with countries, for instance, the United States, mm-hmm. and the United States steps up, mm-hmm. I think it's not exactly fair for my country leaders to say that the United States is imposing. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, there are points when the U.S. has come off as imposing. One of the main things for me that doesn't really work for me is imposition of sanctions. Mm-hmm. I think for me it's a very easy way out, mm-hmm. and I do realize that it's a very difficult thing to calculate, mm-hmm. especially when you're dealing with a possible dictator. Mm-hmm. So
I think we can agree that Museveni is a dictator by this point.
Well,
for your safety, you may not be able to say that, but I will. But I think it should be noted that the United States, after the Jail the Gays bill passed in February 2014, they did cut off some police aid. They did cut off some social programs or shifted them around, but then just a couple of months later, they re-upped the military aid.
Yeah. And that is very problematic for me, because if that's what I'm talking about when it comes to targeted sanctions, because mm-hmm. it should be to the military, because that is what Museveni cherishes the mm-hmm. most. Mm-hmm. So if you're imposing sanctions, it should be that one thing that actually will mm-hmm. make the leader make a difference. Mm-hmm. But it didn't really yield the difference that it was aiming to. Instead, we, the LGBT community, was being blamed for, mm-hmm. rising taxes in produce and so on. And yet, we also consume these things. Yeah. We also have LGBT people who are in the closet who actually go to health facilities and benefit. Mm-hmm. So cutting aid like for health, at the end of the day, we are the ones who suffer.
Yeah. But the United States get to score some propaganda points, and then, as I said, 2 months later, up to the military aid.
And that is not helpful at all. Mm-hmm. It's not helpful.
Yeah.
And that's why, for me, I do not agree with sanctions at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we've got a caller here, and hopefully it's the person we cut off earlier.
Good evening, gentlemen. How you doing?
Good evening. How are you, sir?
All right. I don't know. I know one thing. I know what human violation is. There's parts of Africa, mm-hmm. and it's particularly in the Mideast, gays are put on trial. Mm-hmm. And the court system is totally unfair because the judge and the prosecutor are one and the same. And I brought this issue up once before. And once a person is found guilty in terms of being gay, they are taken out into a public square and they put a noose around their neck and they hoist them up like a crane. And I think that is very barbarism. And the United States is not doing nothing about it at all. And I know a human violation when I think of one, and I just wonder why the United States, in that case, why United Nations not doing nothing about it. Maybe one of the reasons why United Nations not doing nothing about it, because when you look at its membership, most of its memberships are dictators. And I just wish people stand up against these bullies over there in the Mideast that's doing this sort of thing. That's not a fair system of justice.
Okay, well, thank you, caller. I think it's important to note the United States supports any number of countries that have got the death penalty against LGBTs. The north of Nigeria, a big military supplier of Saudi Arabia. These are countries that had their own kill the gays bills way before Uganda did. But because they're key military partners, the United States, the United States doesn't score the propaganda points that they did against President Museveni when the Kill the Gays bills went up, because I guess they decided that Uganda wasn't as important militarily. But you look around the region, Ugandan troops are very much part of international force in Somalia right now.
South Sudan as well.
So I think there's a cynicism that people outside of this country see when they see our politicians claiming to support LGBT rights, but for people on the ground, it looks very hypocritical.
Absolutely. I think really that it is, and something to note, of course, is that Uganda right now. I'm not a politician. I know a couple of things, and
That's
I've observed.
To your credit.
And I've observed things within my region, and Uganda. I think from some of the conversations that I've had with some of the U.S. politicians is that Uganda is the most safer spot or hub within the Eastern Horn region. So when you look at Burundi has that huge unrest. South Sudan, Rwanda is it's its own story. You look at Kenya right now. So Uganda seems to be that quote unquote safe hub for the U.S. to deal with any opposition towards the U.S. in Africa.
In the United States, from the times of Nixon, has used regional powers in this way. That was the way the Shah of Iran was used, for example, and all sorts of human rights atrocities, not just against LGBTs, but everyone. Were
the
overlooked.
Hypocrisy comes to that point. So if you're saying this is a safe place, but the one thing that the LGBT people are asking you to protect them from, which could work, is taking away this one thing, and you cannot do it, and then you go to sections that actually affect LGBT people,
like healthcare.
Like healthcare. Like, what exactly are you really doing? And this is not just for Uganda. I mean,
absolutely.
The law that was in Uganda was copied and pasted in different places. Yesterday, time difference, let's say 2 days ago, there was over 100 people marching on the streets of Nairobi, anti-gay group, marching. And their law that, these anti-gay groups adopted was from Uganda. When you look at the Gambia, that, the law was signed, it's the same copy and paste from Uganda. But what is also very common with this particular law, Uganda was the fertile place for it to, to be sown, is that it comes from here. It comes from the United States.
Scott Lively.
The language, the language that is used, the language like recruitment, that LGBT people are very rich and they use money to to place materials, promotional materials within schools. That language is not only in Uganda. It's in Malawi, it's in Zimbabwe, it's in Nigeria, it's spreading everywhere.
Well, in Scott Lively, a few years ago, people remember lots of PR about the anti-gay laws in Russia. Scott Lively had taken trips to Russia to promote that as well. And I think this goes to another issue as well. How should people of goodwill in this country approach opposing anti-gay measures in other countries? I think because of the United States hypocrisy in so many of these countries around the world, we have to start from a standpoint of respect for the activists on the ground and looking to respect what you want. And so in some circumstances, such as the anti-apartheid movement against racist South Africa, the activists on the ground decided we are going to take the sacrifice of having a cultural and political and economic boycott of South Africa. But they made that decision and then asked other people outside the country to support it. And for that reason, I think it worked. We were beginning to see the same thing with the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement vis-a-vis Israel and its treatment of the Palestinians. But we've seen other instances. There was an ill-fated Boycott Jamaica campaign that was started by United States activists with virtually no consultation, let alone agreement, of Jamaican activists themselves. And it was a horrible mistake because Jamaican activists not only felt disrespected in a way that they had been so many times before by North Americans, but also it wasn't something that they thought would be helpful.
And I think really it's very important, and for our case in Uganda is that, we basically took the bull by its horns. We made sure that we had a supportive coalition from civil society. We formed a civil society coalition of over 50 civil society organizations to fight this particular law and other constitutional laws that were, unconstitutional. And the fact that we asserted ourselves locally, it kind of was a little easier to call for regional support and international support. We issued guidelines on when, how, to whom, actions should be taken. And, not to be misquoted, the issue of sanctions, a group of us within this coalition agreed that sanctions would work. Targeted sanctions. We all agreed.
The military.
The military.
Yeah.
And of course, the negotiations, back here in the States did not really go in our favor. But also, I don't want to rule out that sanctions totally failed. No. I mean, the threat alone kind of helped.
Yeah. Well, it staved off the bill for a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it also, to use the American term, pissed off the president, and he went ahead to sign the bill. It's the second bill in Uganda's history to be signed, with a public ovation, ceremony, and all that, just to try to show the West that, you cannot mess with me. There's a lot of arrogance and just carelessness with that. So it's important to be in constant consultation with activists on the ground, and that, as much as we want that political change at that level, there needs to be this support within the different organizations, civil society organizations within the US, supporting civil society organizations in Uganda or Africa or anywhere else.
Yes.
I mean, the Uganda model can be adopted by anyone as long as there is a group that is willing to champion their own liberties, civil liberties. So it's really important, and I'm seeing this happening in Nigeria now. Nigeria's law was signed before ours, but now Nigerian activists, are speaking more. They're now more in the media, and regionally we also have more support for each other.
Yeah.
which is very important.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're going to be wrapping up here pretty soon, but before we do, I want to again promote a couple of very important activities that Pepe-Julian will be at. You can see him in person rather than through your television screen. The first of all is coming up tomorrow, and that's going to be at the Sidetrack Video Bar. A welcome reception. The Legacy Project is the principal organizer of this weekend's tour, and they're going to be hosting this benefit reception. And information about that's just coming up on your screen in a second. Again, it's going to be tomorrow afternoon, 1 to 3 p.m. at 3349 North Halsted Street. And then coming up on Sunday, we're going to have Pepe-Julian again, and he's going to be speaking about the late Ugandan LGBT leader David Kato, who was murdered for his LGBT activism, and not talking just about memorializing Mr. Kato, but also looking to the future, what we in the United States and people around the world can do to support Ugandan LGBTs fighting for their freedom. And that's going to be 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Sunday at the Center on Halsted, 3656 North Halsted Street. And you can find out more about both of these activities at the legacyprojectchicago.org. Check out that website, and you will get lots of information about what is going on with Pepe's tour. And then finally, we'd just like to thank people that made tonight's show possible. Oh.